we're all being suckers and settling, right? Right, and that I'm promoting $1,350 guitars that are still gonna need some more work out of the box. I'm sorry to tell you, but every Fender Japan guitar that I've had, whether it's new or used, has needed some tweaking out of the box, right? To get playing the best that they possibly can. And if you are saying otherwise, I don't know, please invite me to whatever la land that you have been living in, because I would love to not have to do as many tweaks to these guitars, but it's also part of the fun. Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and today I am super excited because we are finally doing our deep dive of Fender's brand new Vintera III Mid-60s Jaguar. Now, before we get started, I want to thank the kind folks over at Zound for sending this along with the rest of the Vintera III offset guitars to me on loan for review. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, it's no secret, especially if you are familiar with this channel, that the Fender Jaguar has long been my favorite of all of the Fender offset guitars. And over the past couple of years, especially since the discontinuation of the Fender American Original 60s Jaguar, Fender just hasn't had many great options for vintage style Jaguars on the market. And while Fender's Vintera 270s Jaguar was a very nice Jag in its own right, the fact remains that the black block inlays and black binding on that model was definitely not everybody's cup of tea, and folks had long awaited the return of a proper rosewood fretboard Jaguar. And indeed, Fender has come through, paying homage now to the mid-60s, technically transition era, after CBS bought Fender in 1965, but prior to them adding binding to the edge of the fretboard. Now, before we do anything else, let's go ahead and cover the specs. For the body, we've got an alder body here and a tinted maple neck. We've got a gloss polyester finish on the body and a gloss urethane on the neck here. We've also got an Indian rosewood fretboard with 7¼ inch radius, with vintage tall frets, which are not that much taller than vintage size frets. And unlike the Vintera III Mustang, Jazzmaster, and Bass 6, this one is the only one that is actually period correct to the mid-60s, featuring pearloid dot inlays. Now, as far as the nut goes, Fender has finally introduced a bone nut, getting rid of the synthetic bone nut that were on both the Vintera 1 and 2, and leaning into the vintage aesthetics like the rest of the Vintera III offset lineup, we've got the decals sitting over the finish. This also features an Indian rosewood fretboard that is nice and dark, chocolatey brown color here. And for tuners, we have got the Fender single line tuners here, which are made by Ping out in Taiwan. These are high quality tuners that, to be honest with you, I thought these were the pure vintage tuners that Fender featured on both the American Vintage 65 as well as their American Vintage 66 models. And these feel, honestly, just as good as those Goto made tuners on those models. So I definitely would not be looking to swap those out anytime soon if I were to own this guitar. Finishing off with our neck, Fender lists these as having a mid-60s C shape, and it is definitely fuller than the Vintera 270s Jaguar, and feels just as full in hand to both the AV65 that I've got back here in Sonic Blue, as well as my Johnny Marr Jaguar, and actually a bit thicker than my actual 1965 Jaguar that I have back there in Olympic White. Once this hits the bench, we are definitely going to be pulling the calipers out to check what the actual neck thickness is at the 1st and 12th frets here, and compare them against the AV65 and the Johnny Marr, especially if you have played those models and are curious how this compares. Now, there definitely is a very noticeable change with the Vintera III Jaguar in that it is the first non-American Jag to feature the famed Fender mute on this. And that is really, really awesome to see. This is the same unit that they install on their American vintage Jaguars. And I'm glad to say that it is set up right from the factory here and actually does mute these strings, as you can see, without really needing to do much to the setup to get that to work. The rest of the hardware here, not too much change from the Vintera 270s Jaguar. We still have our vintage style Jaguar tremolo or vibrato unit here with the push-in arm and the lock button. And for better or for worse, and for most people it's going to be for worse, we still have our original threaded saddle Jaguar bridge here. As I mentioned in both the Vintera 3 Jazzmaster and Bass 6 videos that featured a very similar bridge, I sad to report that Fender still has not really improved on the tolerances, particularly for the little set screws for the saddle height adjustments, as well as the overall bridge height adjustments, which can result in rattles and buzzing, and also just instability with these tending to sink over time. So if I were to own this model, I definitely would be hitting those little set screws with some Loctite 222 purple. It has been my go-to recommendation ever since some folks had told me to switch off of the Loctite blue, especially because it's way easy to go overboard with that Loctite blue and end up with screws that get stuck that you're going to need to heat up with a soldering iron to loosen, or that if you potentially force with your Allen key could end up stripping those screws, which nobody wants to deal with. So yeah, just a single line of that down each one of those set screws should help you make this bridge actually work and avoid the need to swap out the bridge right away. Now, in the gig bag, Fender also gives you the little sleeve that includes our tremolo arm, which we're going to pop in just a second here, along with the Allen key that you need to be able to adjust the saddles as well as the height of your bridge. Now we're going to get a closer glimpse at this in just a moment here with the electronics, but there were some big changes made, most notably with the fact that they have reintroduced the shielding paint, the quote-unquote conductive shielding paint, which I will touch on a little more once we crack this thing open. So that is nice to see. And we've also got, for the first time on a mid-tier Fender, actual cloth covered wiring harnesses. They are the same 22 gauge Gavit cloth covered wire that they are using on the more expensive American Vintage series. And this time around, we are getting some mid-60s style Jaguar pickups, which, based on my first impressions video, which is up here in case you haven't seen it, where I unboxed and gave my initial thoughts on every Vintera 3 model, they definitely have a bit more character to me than the pure vintage 65s that you can commonly buy as aftermarket pickups from Fender. I am very curious to see what the output on these is as compared to the American Vintage 65 pickups and even the Johnny Marr Jaguar pickups, because yeah, I really quite like these. The rest of the electronics, as you will see, is your standard fare high quality CTS pots in both your lead circuit and your rhythm, as well as your Switchcraft switches throughout. Now, out of the box, the Vintera 3 Jag played surprisingly well, and I feel like most folks out there who aren't insane like myself when it comes to the nitty-gritty details of a setup would find this to be an overall pretty good setup. Now, for me personally, I feel like it's a tiny bit higher than I usually would go for, and I would definitely want to either lower the bridge or maybe potentially add a tiny bit more shim to get the action to be just a little bit lower. And aside from my gripes about the tolerances on the set screws, it just is overall pretty playable, and I'm going to be sharing with you in just a minute here what the stock setup is on this currently, and then we're going to see if we can dial it in just a bit better before we go ahead and do our sound demos for this, and I share with you my overall final thoughts on the Vintera III Mid-60s Jaguar. All right, so it's now time to get into the nerdy stuff that we love to do, especially because this is an offset enthusiast channel. I'm going to be throwing this on the bench. We are going to crack it open, go under the hood, and show you what is going on there. And then we are going to do our best to kind of refine the setup just a bit. As I said, it's already playing pretty good as is, but maybe we can just do a little bit to address some of the rattles that we are getting from the bridge. And just see if we can get the action just a bit lower, calibrate our tremolo, and then we are going to do the sound demos through the trusty old Princeton Reverb Reissue, and I will conclude with my overall final thoughts on this new Vintera III Jag. So let's go ahead and throw this on the bench. All right, so we are back from having this thing on the bench, and the first thing of note was that indeed the string ground for this guitar is to the bridge cymbal rather than the tremolo like you might find on an AVRI 62 or an AV 65 guitar. We did end up finding a few anomalies. The first thing that I noticed was that the pick guard shield was completely ungrounded, not connected at all to our circuit. So that in effect makes the Faraday cage here incomplete. And then the second thing was there was a random piece of copper foil tape up here by the rhythm circuit. It was connected to nothing. It wasn't taped onto the shielding paint. Not sure what that was supposed to do, but I left it because that's the way that it came. Now, as expected, we did find that conductive shielding paint in all of the cavities, but like I mentioned in the Vintera III Jazzmaster video, unfortunately, I was not getting positive continuity between that shielding paint and the ground in our circuit. And when testing various points between that conductive shielding paint itself, both far as well as really close together, not only was I not getting continuity still, but also I was getting on my multimeter reads of well over 1,000 ohms. So on that front, it's hard to argue that this shielding paint is actually doing what it's supposed to do, which is to block out more noise and on some level help a little bit on the 60 cycle hum front. Now, the silver lining here is that thankfully on a Jaguar, you do already have the claws on them, which do somewhat of a decent job in shielding. And the Jaguar pickups in general are definitely not as bad on the 60 cycle hum front as, say, a Jazzmaster. We also discovered that indeed this guitar is fitted with that 22 gauge colored cloth covered wiring along with your CTS 1 meg pots in your lead control circuit, your CTS 50K and 1 meg mini pots in your rhythm circuit, as well as your Switchcraft switches throughout, and a very, very high quality affair. And the one thing that I do prefer that they have been doing on these Vintera models is they have opened up the cavity so that you can easily lift the harness for whatever reason if you need to. So for example, if you did want to add more shielding paint, enough layers for you to get positive continuity, or maybe you wanted to add shielding tape, it makes it so much easier to work with because you are not having to try to reconfigure the wiring through the tiny holes that are in between the various cavities like you would on, say, like an American Vintage 65 or even the Johnny Marr Jaguar. And on that, as much as I do love vintage specs, I am all about making life easier, especially for those of us who are tinkerers. And I would definitely have that be a permanent and welcome change if they started doing that on even the American Vintage lineup. Now, as I mentioned from the top, they had already dialed in the setup on this Jaguar pretty good in stock form, and I only had to do a minor amount of tweaking. The most significant things that I did just to help with any rattle or buzzing at the bridge was adding the Loctite 222 purple to all of the little set screws for the saddles, as well as the overall bridge height adjustment. And then I did also lower the mute by about 0.5 millimeter and raised up those saddles, so you're not going to be cutting your hand as you play it. And I ended up setting the mute so that when it's disengaged, the back edge of that mute is sitting about 3.5 millimeters high, which helped us also then lower our bridge down, which had started off with a bridge height of 6 millimeters. It helped us lower that bridge down to about 4.5 millimeters now. And I still have more than enough break angle because remember, I compensated by raising the saddle so that those screws are not protruding anymore. And so the setup now just feels really, really good. We ended up with a final action at the 12th fret of 1.85 millimeters from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the low E string, and about 1.75 millimeters to the bottom of the high E string. So yeah, definitely nice, comfortable action. And after all of those adjustments and also calibrating our vibrato, which also did not take that much to get set upright, literally maybe 2 turns of our tension screw here to be properly calibrated. I then checked the relief again in the neck after it had settled in, and now I am getting about 0.08 of an inch, which is a little bit less than Fender's recommended spec of 0.10 of an inch at both your high E string and low E string from the top of the 8th fret. And so that is nice because now the neck is even straighter. The action overall feels lower. We're not really getting any buzzing or rattling from our bridge, and we are able to do bends without choking out here. So yeah, this did not take a lot to get playing well, and it definitely is good enough now with enough break angle behind the bridge that I do not think that we are going to be getting any popping out of these strings from the saddles, especially if I'm playing mindfully and not overly hard. And you can definitely make this stock bridge work for you with a minimal amount of effort and expense. We then finished off the setup by just lubricating the arm and installing it, and then stretching our strings and adding some lubricant in the nut slots. And now this thing just feels like $1 million. Seriously, it feels so much more premium than it's priced here. We're not getting any squeaking. You can see that even from the factory, I already have a decent amount of angle to this vibrato arm here, and also it is not coming loose or floppy from the factory. So that is very, very nice to see. That has been consistent across the board with pretty much all of the Vintera 3 offsets that come with this type of tremolo. And after setting the spacing and radius of our saddles to match the 7¼ inch fretboard and oriented in a way to mimic the way that a vintage Mustang bridge would be, where the saddles are parallel with the base of the bridge, I'm happy to report that the mute is still working as intended. And also from the factory, this thing was already perfectly intonated, so I did not need to make any adjustments to that at all. And while we were applying the lubrication, I did also check to make sure that none of the strings were binding in those nut slots, and I am happy to say that this nut was cut quite well from the factory with no binding whatsoever. So as promised, we're going to be starting off our sound demos now with a 4-way shootout between this Vintera 3 Mid-60s Jaguar and my Sonic Blue AV65, my Gold Sparkle Johnny Marr, and my actual Olympic White vintage 1965 Jaguar. That way you can hear how these pickups stack up against those more premium models. And I think based on my first impressions video that I did with this already, that they are going to compare favorably because I did quite like these pickups. All right, so that was pretty illuminating hearing the various pickup comparisons between all of these models. And as I was personally expecting, these definitely held their own. I think these pickups are probably the best Jaguar pickups that have come in any Vintera model, and definitely stand toe-to-toe with, at very minimum, the AV65 pickups or the pure vintage 65 pickups that came in those. And I did, just in case anyone was wondering, did set the pickup heights across all of the models here to very similar heights, so that we were getting as close to a fair comparison among all of them as possible. And yeah, I do like the sparkly kind of tone that I'm getting from these, and definitely pushing the amp a bit closer to the edge of breakup, despite the fact that when I measured with my multimeter, both of these pickups are still around that 6.5, 6.6K DC resistance. And so the outputs on these are the way that a normal vintage style Jaguar set would sound like. But yeah, I really dig the sound of these overall. And I'm also glad to hear that these, despite my gripes about the shielding paint and all of that, were not that much more noticeably noisy as compared to the other models, all of which have those brass shielding plates and the aluminum pickguard shields that are grounded underneath. We are back now on our bridge pickup, this time with the strangle switch engaged, and we've turned the amp to about 7.5 to get a bit more of that tube overdrive from the amp. And I was playing pretty hard there, and it looks like these saddles held up and the strings didn't jump out. So that is definitely good to see. All right, so we are back on our bridge pickup now. This time we've got the mute engaged, and we put a tiny bit of reverb on the amp for some vibes. Here we go. Now we've got both pickups together in parallel. So we are back on the neck pickup, and we've turned both the amp's volume and the reverb up. So let's go ahead and see what this sounds like. And now lastly, we are back on our rhythm circuit. We have turned the amp's volume back to about 5 and turned that reverb to a bare minimum. All right, we got both pickups now in parallel with the amp turned up to about 7.5, the reverb about 2. All right, so, well, there it is, the Vintera III Mid-60s Jaguar. Just to wrap it up, I am really impressed with this. I think out of the whole lot of all of the Vintera III offset guitars that I had a chance to review over the past month, this one is definitely the most impressive. It was the most well set up out of the box. It has the best fit and finish overall, while we were still getting some 60 cycle hum because of the incomplete Faraday cage with the shielding. It wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be, though there definitely is still room for improvement. Now, the tweaks that I did on the bench were fairly minimal overall. Again, just the Loctite on the bridge, saddle screws and the bridge height screws. And that was basically it. A little bit of calibration for the tremolo, and honestly, no big deal. And that is really nice to see. I did not have to take an extended amount of time to wrangle this in because, again, it was already, for the most part, set up and playing well. And that was mostly just to address any issues that may happen, for example, during this demo, or for whoever it is that ends up buying this after I send this back to our friends over at Zounds. Now, the standout features on this Jaguar for me, one is the neck. The neck here is nice and full in hand. I actually did end up comparing the thickness of this neck, which was 0.85 inches at the first fret and 0.972 inches at the 12th. So that is pretty darn chunky at the 12th. But when comparing to my AV65, that one was a little bit slimmer at the first fret at 8.22 inches, but pretty much exactly the same, 0.970 inches at the 12th fret. And then on the Johnny Marr, even more similar, the Johnny Marr had a 0.832 inch thickness at the first fret, and then the same exact 0.972 inches at the 12th. And the funny thing was, for the vintage 1965 Jaguar back there in Olympic white, that one had the thickest at the first fret with 0.867, but it literally had no taper going up to the 12th fret. So it was basically a 0.867 thickness also at the 12th fret, and therefore is overall the thinnest feeling of all of the necks that I had compared it to. But yeah, it's really comfortable. It reminds me a lot of the Vintera I Jaguar neck, if any of you have ever played that one. But definitely make sure before getting this that you get on with a fuller feeling neck, because that is not something that you're going to be able to avoid with this model. And to sum it all up, all of the premium appointments that you are getting on this basically sub $1,400 Jaguar are kind of insane to me. You are getting that same mute that you get on an American vintage reissue. You're getting a premium tremolo unit with the lock button and push-in arm that is just a couple stone throws away from being the same quality as an American vintage reissue unit. You've got the same premium wiring harness and electronics by CTS and Switchcraft with the cloth-covered Gavit 22-gauge wiring that we are seeing for the first time on a mid-tier model that is effectively the same, again, as what you were getting on a much more expensive American vintage reissue unit. And then on top of that, you're getting your bone nut here, you're getting your upgraded Ping single line Fender tuners here, which feel also very similar to the Goto SD91s, while this one has your target burst or clown burst kind of finish with the opaque yellow and red. no grain on this model, which some people have been asking for a long time, but they also dropped a shell pink and Sherwood green Jaguar with matching headstock, which people have been asking for those colors on a vintage spec Jag for so long. And the fact that it's coming on, again, a sub $1,500 Jaguar with all of these appointments is awesome. If you line all that up and really consider the other options in the sub $2,000 price range, you're just not going to get all of this. You could go for a Fender Japan Jaguar, for example, right? But as much of a fan as I am of the Fender Japan offsets, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Yes, indeed, their craftsmanship when it comes to the major parts of the guitar, like the fretwork, are basically second to none, and that stands for sure. But you are going to be making some compromises depending on what your preferences are. For example, all of the Fender Japan Jaguars that have been coming out, I think since about maybe 2018 or so, have been coming with a much narrower 40mm nut width, which definitely most people out there, especially if you're used to only Western-made guitars like from the USA, from Mexico, cannot get on with that because the cowboy chord area, your open chords, they can feel quite a bit cramped up at the nut. The second thing is that most all of those, except for the factory special run models, come with these U-shaped necks, which have a significant amount more shoulder to them and do feel fuller in hand, as full, if not even fuller than what we have here. That is another thing to consider. On top of that, the Japanese vibratos are definitely inferior to these. You're never going to have a mute installed stock on any of those Japanese Fenders. The wiring on the Fender Japan guitars is perfectly fine. Very serviceable. And in fact, there is some advantage to the wiring for the Fender Japan Jaguars in that each individual wire, despite the fact that they are the PVC coated wires, are actually independently shielded, which usually make the Fender Japan guitars quieter, on top of the fact that most of the ones that I have checked out do get positive continuity from the conductive shielding paint that they are using in the cavities. But another downside that I have found on the Fender Japan guitars that have come out, the past 6-7 years or so, is that they also started switching out to these cheaper feeling economy tuners for some reason, which is very weird. And a lot of them come with basswood bodies, which may not matter to you, but having an actual alder body does matter to some. For me, I can go either way and have no particular preference. But no doubt, it's nice to see that, like the rest of the vintage accurate specs, we're getting an alder body on this $1,350 Vintera III Jaguar. And on that note, I do want to mention again, because I've gotten even more comments, basically people trying to flame me for promoting the Vintera III offsets, despite the fact that they need a bit of work to get playing their best. I just want to reiterate, right? None of these guitars, none of them, maybe with the exception of the Bass 6 that definitely needed to have the mute set properly, absolutely needed to have the work that I did done for them to be playing decently. All of them played decently out of the box, and that's facts. But if you want to be able to dial in the best, and of course, this is an offset enthusiast channel. I am an offset guitar specialist and guitar tech that only works on offset guitars. So these are my world, right? And dialing them in to feel the best that I possibly can and for them to sound their best is what I do. And that's the kind of information that I share with you, and probably the reason you even watch my videos to begin with, especially if you've come back time and again. And I do this stuff because I really love these guitars, and also to give back in the same way that the overall offset community, like everybody over at offsetguitars.com, has shared their knowledge and experiences, and having community in any kind of niche, in any kind of hobby or passion is amazing to have. Unlike the trolls that will come into the comments and just basically try to trash people who are trying to actually contribute to their community with nothing but negativity to put on the table, you know, I'm actually just trying to share here what my experiences are in the most transparent and honest way as I can with all of you, so that you know that you can make a better informed decision when it comes to buying these new guitars that are coming out. And with that, I honestly don't know where some of these folks who are, I feel like, looking at the past through rose-tinted glasses are thinking that we're now living in an era that is post, you know, good setup, that everything during the golden age of offsets. I'm sorry to tell you, my friends, but the reason why these guitars never popped off in the 60s to begin with was all of the issues that we're constantly covering on this channel. The issues with like this effing bridge, right? The issues with the tremolo. All of these things are the reasons that these did not become as popular as your Stratocaster and your Telecaster. So don't come in my comments and tell me that there was some golden age of offsets where people weren't actually doing all of this extra work to get their guitars playing right. Why do you think Kurt Cobain and Sonic Youth and Jay Mascis and all these people were throwing friggin' Tune-o-matic bridges on their guitars? Because this bridge sucked for what they were doing. That's why. That's why. Right? So don't be revisionist with your history, because that's bullshit. You and I know that that's bullshit. You are trying to gatekeep and trying to act like you've been here before everybody else, and that we're all being suckers and settling, right? Right, and that I'm promoting $1,350 guitars that are still going to need some more work out of the box. I'm sorry to tell you, but every Fender Japan guitar that I've had, whether it's new or used, has needed some tweaking out of the box, right? To get playing the best that they possibly can. And if you are saying otherwise, I don't know, please invite me to whatever realm, la la land, that you have been living in, because I would love to not have to do as many tweaks to these guitars. But it's also part of the fun. It's why everybody is so engaged in this community, is because we all share that common camaraderie in facing these weird quirks that we have to deal with on offset guitars. And so with that, that's kind of how I'm going to end this video, because that's offset guitars 101, right? If you are coming and seeing one of my videos where I'm talking about all this stuff that I'm doing and all you ever play is a fucking Tele or a Les Paul, get off my lawn. Get off my lawn. You don't know anything about these guitars. You know nothing. Okay? But if you're willing to go on the hero's journey because you like the uniqueness that comes with getting these guitars set up well, then yeah, stick around. Stick around. Right? It's worth it. It's worth the extra little bit of effort, right, that you are going to put in, and doesn't even necessarily require that much money, which is exactly what I've done with this and every single other Vintera 3 offset that I've covered over the past month. We didn't buy any $200-$300 bridges, right? We didn't swap out the tremolo. We didn't swap out the pickups, and these guitars play friggin' phenomenally after that bit of work. So anyway, that's it. That's gonna do it for this video, folks. Sorry for getting all friggin' Lewis Black on you at the end here, but you know, that grinds my gears, right? When people come in and say some stuff that they have no goddamn clue what they're talking about. Love this guitar. Thank you again to our kind friends at Zounds for sending this and the rest of the offset models from the Vintera 3 lineup to me on loan for review. I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. If you are considering one of these guitars for yourself, I highly recommend that you use the affiliate links that I have left down below. I have loved Zounds and have been a loyal customer for the past 10 plus years. And if you are interested in splitting up your payments into manageable monthly installments rather than a bigger lump sum right up front, well, they do it without any interest ever. There's no complicated application process. It's actually a breeze, no background check, no credit check, no social security number even. And when it comes to customer service, seriously, the folks at Zounds are second to none. So thank you again to Zounds, and in particular, my boy Billy over there, who hooked it up for this Vintera 3 launch. If you do use those affiliate links, it kicks back a bit to this channel, which helps us over here immensely, helps me to continue to create videos just like this one. Now, if you have bought one of these Vintera 3 Jags on launch day, or you've gotten one very recently and have already put some time on it, I would love to hear from you down in the comments. Let me know what you overall think of the guitar, and especially would love to hear from folks who have had other Jaguars, whether they are American vintage reissues or actual vintage Jaguars or made in Japan or Squire Jags. Would love to hear how you think these compare to the ones that you've had before. And if you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars, buying, and setup tips.